is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Welcome to our special show, China's New Vitality, where we speak to business leaders and experts about China. All this amid the country's 2023 political season and a focus on China's economy and a path towards modernization. I'm Philip Yen here in Washington. We start off with one of the most anticipated documents of China's political season, the Government Work Report. We're going to break down the highlights for you, starting with the economy. China's GDP growth target has been set now at around 5% for this year. The country also aims to create 12 million urban jobs and a special emphasis on innovation-driven development. In addition, China's factory performance is now the best in 11 years since the COVID restrictions have been lifted. We spoke with Brazilian economist Otaviano Canuto. He's a senior fellow at the Policy Center for the New South and former VP of the World Bank. He says China's recovery from the pandemic will have a big impact on Latin America.
The fact is that given the dependence of exports from South America, particularly to China, the recovery of growth in China will impact positively the producers of, as the report mentioned, not only iron ore, but also soybeans and so on. But it's important to keep in sight that the pattern of growth in China is also changing a bit, in the sense that, the continuity of the rebalancing of the Chinese economy will lead it to work more on more value-added segments of value chains. So qualitatively, there will be a higher demand for critical minerals, for instance, and as time passes by, less so for things like oil or even iron ore. And the pattern of investments by China in the region has also been changing over time. Instead of the old packages of large amounts of money to state-owned companies to secure the supply of things like oil and coal or more than coal, copper and so on. Now we have seen this interest by Chinese investors into service.
China's opening up is not just benefiting the domestic economy. Robert Hormats is a visiting lecturer at Yale University and former U.S. Undersecretary of State for the Economic Growth, Energy, and the Environment. He had this to say.
Growth in China certainly is a way of encouraging and supporting and stimulating growth in other parts of the world, particularly in East Asia and Central Asia, which are very close trading partners with China, as you know, but also in the United States and elsewhere. China's a huge economy, and it is both an exporter and an importer. So China's supply chain can be beneficial to other countries that need components made in China, but Chinese demand can be very helpful to suppliers in various parts of the world that sell to China and have found it difficult to sell in a low growth environment that's impeded by closures due to COVID.
For more perspective on China's economy, we're joined by Mark Learn. He's the CEO of JP Morgan China, and he started by discussing how the economy has gone from strength to strength.
Obviously, if you wind back 10 years, right, till now, you would figure out that China has contributed to 36% of the world's GDP growth, and that's humongous. And so it's here to stay. It's a very essential global engine for growth. So from that standpoint, let's wind back 2022, very challenging year geopolitically, and a lot of factors, right? And a massive rate hike cycle from the Fed, a lot of inflation running away. But you look at the trade perspective, right? China has trade with more than 140 countries. And what's the result? The result is that the China's trade on a year-on-year basis is up 7.7%. Then you look at the FDI, the foreign direct investment. In fact, 1.23 trillion renminbi is still up 12% plus a year. If you look at certain select sector, the number is even more staggering. The manufacturing sector, on a year-on-year basis, foreign direct investment, again, right, up 46%. How about new technology? New technology industry total up 28%.
We have got three experts to provide insight on the Chinese economy. First off, we have Yan Lang. She's the professor of economics at Willamette University. Also, William Li, chief economist at the Milken Institute. And we also have Ryan Patel, the global business executive, senior fellow at the Drucker School of Management at Claremont Graduate University. Welcome to the show, everybody. Yan, let's start with you. This government work report has been highly anticipated both domestically and internationally. I'm curious to get your first thoughts after reading the report.
Right. I think the first impression is, the report has reviewed the past 5 years, 10 years of achievements of the Chinese economy. And of course, it also projects the future. So the growth target for 2023 is set at around 5%, which a lot of experts said is rather conservative. But I think it's definitely reasonable and feasible, judging from a sobering analysis of the global economic dynamics and also the domestic priorities and those long-term growth objectives. And the work report also covered many different aspects of the Chinese economy. It also provides, targets for inflation, job creation. It emphasizes, technological development, self-independency in technology, as well as, rural revitalization and also many other important aspects, including, the budgets for example, military spending, local government bond quota, and so on and so forth.
Right. William, you and I have talked about the China economy a number of times, and I would say you are cautiously optimistic. There are obviously challenges. Some people thought that the target might perhaps be a little bit higher. Some thought it might be a little lower. I think the quote about 5% seems to be not too hot, not too slow. But there are a lot of factors as to everyone predicting what's going to happen in 2023.
Well, Phil, I think the prediction of 5% growth and putting that as a target going forward is a sign of the times. How uncertain it is right now about the global recovery, China's own recovery, and China's own ambitious plans to shift from being an export engine and a locomotive for the world economy to a domestic-oriented economy where consumption and services are being emphasized. And I think one of the things that struck me about the report this year compared to previous years is how much stock taking there's been. It's been almost a stock taking of this is what we've done. And going forward, there's much less of that because of, I think, the uncertainty of the global economy and the ability of policy to drive the private sector in China toward more domestic services. And that's a huge challenge that's yet to be met.
Ryan, this is a theme that both Yan and William have echoed many times, is obviously the domestic consumption, domestic consumption, domestic consumption. I think we all know that. Are there specific sectors that you think need to be focused on, whether it's hospitality or it's travel or it's the SMEs, or as they say, driving domestic consumption, getting the consumers optimistic about the economy and getting out there to spend, because there are significant challenges that they're also facing post-COVID.
And one of the things you mentioned why it's a theme, it's also because there's a drop in demand, not just because of Chinese goods, it's because of the result of slowing economies outside. So it puts a pressure back onto what it is, the consumption piece, which is a big deal. But I think the other industries that, you mentioned, office services, I think is another one, auto and home appliances, those big ticket items from a local level, at a government level, if they can raise those things, have that support. And then don't forget, I think the elderly care and infant care could be a really big boom to help the economy as well. Now, I haven't mentioned consumer spending on retail sales yet, because that has to drive other aspects of investment, and obviously the technology aspect to make sure you get those margins to be able to make a profit that makes sense. So I think these are the couple of industries that I think that they want to kind of get back in there, start kind of growing. And again, the focus is back domestically, because that'll kick off what it needs to go when it starts going exporting their own goods trade-wise.
Always appreciate your candid feedback among all the guests. Ryan Patel, William Li, Yan Lang, always a pleasure to have you on our show. Appreciate your insights. And now for a look at China's stock market, which has been growing in importance. And to break that all down for us, John Terrett has this from the New York Stock Exchange.
By and large, Chinese stocks are mainly domestically owned. That is to say, most of them are bought by Chinese individuals or Chinese companies or Chinese organizations. It's only about 5% of the China stocks that are owned by people who live outside of China, overseas buyers. Domestic buyers buy A shares, foreign buyers buy B shares. And it's fair to say that generally speaking, stocks that trade within China are rather less tied to the vagaries of the economy than are stocks here in New York. You know, because you hear me say time and time again, if there is some company earnings that are good or bad, or an upgrade or a downgrade, or any piece of information from the central bank, it can move not only an individual stock, but the entire sector that that stock is in, and indeed sometimes the entire bourse, like the Dow or the NASDAQ. Now, generally speaking, just speaking in general terms, people who start companies in China prefer to go for bank loans rather than raising equity capital. And I think it's also true to say that while Shanghai is the third biggest stock market in the world and certainly the biggest in Asia, Hong Kong, for historical reasons, is known really for its diversity of companies. There are far more overseas companies, I think, trading there. It's more of an international hub. And that is why Beijing likes to refer Chinese companies that it wishes to delist in New York, or who have been told to delist in New York, it refers them to the Hong Kong stock market. And we've seen that in recent history in the last year or so with several of the Chinese telecoms companies. But it is also true to say that people here who invest in Chinese stocks are only too well aware that when they do that, there will always be things about investing in China that they can't control. So from that perspective, it is a little bit more risky than, say, putting your money into a US corporation, but the returns could be even greater. John Terrett, CGTN, on the trading floor of the New York Stock Exchange.
We spoke to Hu Wei. He's the president of the CEO of Bank of China here in the U.S. and also chairman of the China General Chamber of Commerce in the United States.
As I am the chairman of the China General Chamber of Commerce in the U.S., I've seen that Chinese companies represented by our members have played a very important role in America. Even though all our Chinese-funded enterprises in the U.S. come from China, they are all registered locally, follow the strictest U.S. labor standards. Their employment and tax standards follow local laws and regulations. They've also created jobs and improved communications. In addition, we feel that the business community is actually a very good platform for exchanges of ideas between the two governments. We also serve roles that governments find difficult to fulfill.
China is also working to be self-reliant when it comes to technology. So what would that mean for the tech industry and its potential?
I think that China's growth strategy going forward in complete terms is called what we call here dual circulation, where China on one hand boosts the growth in domestic market, but at the same time synergize that with continued openness. And in terms of kind of China are moving towards a more self-reliant economy with technology, I think the impact is not just on the US, but also on the global. I think as a result, we will see more and more innovative technology and business models coming out of China because of that.
High-tech development is one part of China's path towards modernization, but another long-term mission is getting more people out of poverty. So far, the number of people helped is impressive, but authorities plan to do much, much more. China has already lifted 100 million people out of poverty by February of 2021, and in 2023, the #1 central document emphasized the modernization of rural work. President Xi also emphasized that agriculture is the foundation of a modern socialist country. For more on China's poverty reduction plans, we spoke to Robert Kuhn, the chairman and president of the Kuhn Foundation. He's an international corporate strategist and an expert on China.
The key point to understand rural revitalization is when the anti-poverty campaign was claimed to be a success because it hit its certain goals, the recognition was that, yes, it brought everyone out of extreme or abject poverty, but relative poverty was still a major problem in China. And this is not something that could be solved in an instant. It's a multi-decade approach. And so almost instantaneously, at the beginning of 2021, after the goal was reached of anti-poverty in 2020, the whole anti-poverty apparatus, which was enormous in terms of the party, 5 levels of government, various programs, was transformed to rural revitalization. And so this was not the rural revitalization was not something that just came out of the blue, but it was a direct successor to the anti-poverty campaign. This one having a bigger vision, because it's bringing hundreds of thousands of villages, particularly in rural areas, up to standards of living that President Xi wants to be roughly in the same level as urban areas by mid-century.
We're going to continue this discussion on China's poverty alleviation and rural revitalization with our panel of guests. Yang Lang comes back to us from Willamette University, along with Ryan Patel over at the Claremont Graduate University. Welcome back, you guys. Yeah, and let me talk to you about this, because this has been well documented that China has done a remarkable job lifting hundreds of millions of people out of poverty. That said, yes, it's an achievement, but the work is really never done. There's more work to always do, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think Kun mentioned earlier that even though the absolute poverty has been eradicated, which is people who live below about $1.5, $1.6 per day, that's gone. But still, we still have the relative poverty, and we still have the wide income disparity between rural and urban residents, now stood at about 2.63 back in 2019. So there's still a lot more work to do, not to mention to prevent those who are out of poverty from slipping back into poverty. So as the #1 central document has articulated, they will continue to modernize agriculture. They're going to continue to build rural areas and also continue to improve the lives of farmers. So there are a series of concrete policies, such as developing the rural infrastructure, both in terms of roads and bridges, but also the digital infrastructure. And also the emphasis is to continue to support rural industries and employments, as well as continue to provide some of the very basic social services like compulsory education, healthcare, as well as safe housing. So all these are very important to sustain that achievement of poverty eradication.
Right. I mean, look, there is no question that lives have improved, right? And that's how I translate poverty alleviation is your life better today than it was yesterday? And the answer is yes. But Ryan, when you think about the high-tech development, China faces an issue that every country faces. There will always be rich and poor and a gap between the have and have-nots. The question is how best to close that gap. What policies or issues does China need to address, I suppose, in 2023 to get to that goal?
Yeah, and I think it's when you see many countries, and including China, you've got these great initiatives that you start, which feel it's very hard to do in the first place to start it. So once you start it, how do you keep continuing to make those initiatives and make those impacts and evolve, because there's more people going into those initiatives? So one thing that I think is the educational realm. You mentioned the high tech, right? When you do increase and get people out of poverty, how can you get them to be a working member of the economic class, or in the place, if it's agriculture or if it's in tech? Can you give them a path? Can you create a path? And that's where the difficult part is. You need to have more programs and policies in place to make that transition easier, to help China's domestic economy, to where each member of all kinds of, wherever you are on the spectrum on the income, that you're actually making the impact wherever you go. And I think that's going to be key for China here is, can you create the next generation of workers across different industries in a place that you can give them resources? Because it is difficult, right? Where, depending on where you live and how much money you make, you may not have those resources. And I think there's an opportunity there for China to be able to create a path that can be helpful and beneficial for everybody involved.
Yeah, and then there's the tricky question of inflation and the cost of living. That's for another time. Ryan, Yan, appreciate it as always. One of the key global challenges we all face is climate change. And in China, this year's political season highlighted the importance of sustainable development to better protect the planet. China will continue to pursue green and low carbon development. Also, in the last 5 years, there's been an improvement in China's air quality. China will also work towards reducing carbon emissions in an effort to become carbon neutral by the year 2030. For more insight on China's role when it comes to sustainable development and mutual benefits, we welcome back Yan Lang and also William Li. And Yan, let me start with you on this. The policies on sustainable development, we've heard this before. How is this different now in 2023? Because things are much more modern and maybe a little bit more complex right now.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think we have all known that China has made great efforts in, boosting its, energy sustainability and also, energy, efficiency. China is now spending about $546 billion every year on renewable energies, electric vehicles and battery, and that's 4 times the amount of the United States. So I think China is going to continue to work on those 2 very important aspects. One is to continue to boost the capacity of renewable energies, which, by the way, has doubled over the past 5 years. And China is also aiming to reduce the energy intensity, which is, how much energy you consume per unit of GDP, by 2% every year. I think so. All these efforts resulted in, I think, a great achievement towards the goal of, carbon peak in 2030 and neutrality in 2060. Now, that said, I think, there has been concern about, China is going to pivot and repivot towards coal. I think there's a lesson to be learned about the importance of energy security. And also, don't forget that we had an energy crisis back in 2021, which then, led to the resumption of some of the, coal power plants. So I think it's important for China to strike the balance of, energy security, sovereignty, and continue with the efforts of, renewable energies and energy conservation.
Right. I mean, that brings up a good point. There's been much made about the use of coal around the world. And we all know China does use a lot of coal. They're trying to reduce that and use more natural gas, using more green energy. And to that effect, William, China is planning to do more. They obviously should do more, but the whole world needs to do more. It's not just China, obviously. What more should China do, and how would they lead the global community when it comes to climate change?
Well, Phil, we've always talked about having more green production of GDP. And making GDP green is something that's been in policy for the longest time. Right now, we have a convergence of the policy as well as technology. We are at a precipice right now where a turning point that allows China to adopt the modern technology that is available to make coal cleaner, to make the existing fossil fuels more green. And I think that's a technology, an innovation that needs to be incentivized. And China, I think, is at the forefront of doing exactly that. So I think this is a turning point that really makes real the long-standing goals of becoming more green for China.
What do you think you would tell a foreign company who is interested in placing a manufacturing or a facility hub in China when it comes to green energy and climate change and all around good business environment? Yan?
I think that's a great question. So first thing we noticed is that China has been relaxing the restrictions of foreign direct investment. As a matter of fact, in the past 5 years, there has been a reduction of 51% of the restricted list for the areas where FDI is welcomed. So in general, I think China welcomes FDIs, especially in these high tech and also sustainable green tech industries. Right? Let's not forget Tesla is the one that we're able to come to China without forming a joint venture. So I think there's definitely a lot of opportunities for the foreign direct investment. But I think, again, I do believe there's a huge room for foreign direct investments, especially, I think William mentioned, one of the delegates in the 2 session actually proposed that we need to accelerate the investment in research on carbon capture, utilization, and storage. And that is very important. If China does have to utilize some coal, then I think that technology would be super important, and we definitely can use some help from foreign companies, and they can also enjoy the growth, right, in China's markets.
Right. William, you get the last word. it's not a simple question. There are obviously a lot of variables in this relationship between the U.S. and China, and quite frankly, China and the rest of the world. What advice would you give Beijing when it comes to promoting foreign direct investment, specifically in China?
I would say to the authorities, integrate your strategies for growth. You have a regional strategy where you want to push growth out west to Chengdu and Chongqing and integrating the Belt and Road and innovation strategies. And Westerners are seeing these incentives put in place, but they don't know enough about how reliable these new policies are going to be. So my advice to the municipalities as well as the central government is make clear that you want sustained policies to innovate in new growth centers like the ones out west, and to incentivize foreigners to just stop looking at the traditional places of investment, which is the Pearl River Delta and Shanghai and Beijing, but rather look west. And because that's where the future of China is going to be, because the policies wanted growth to go out there, and that's where foreign investors are going to have to go for new incentives and for new opportunities.
Okay, that seems like a nice place to end it. William, Yan, thank you as always. We had a chance to catch up with Jeff Green. He's the chairman of the Sino-American Aviation Heritage Foundation, and he talks about where development is headed for in China.
China has built a wonderful automobile, its economy. It can drive anywhere it wants. It's a luxury car, it's a powerful car. Now I think it's time that China needs to, and I think they are doing it, we're seeing it. The government has to look back to support its citizens, support investment, support in banking, support real estate. I mean, we see that. But beyond that, the good news is comparing China to the United States, you get things done. And America needs to learn from that. Right now, unfortunately, my country is so divided over everything. What sandwich do you eat? They're going to argue about which sandwich you eat. But the strength of China is that it can go forward as a group, it can decide on a policy, and it can pursue that policy.
One of the main aspects of China's economy is the notion of mutual benefit. Not only it means the benefit of the Chinese economy, but also for the global win-win cooperation. And that means ensuring and enhancing China's appeal to foreign investors, as well as greater efforts to attract and utilize foreign capital. Trade is one of the best ways to monitor the mutual benefit. In China, trade in goods exceeded expectations in 2022. One of China's biggest initiatives is the Belt and Road. It's a vast infrastructure plan that spans multiple continents, and so far that initiative has boosted trade involved in countries by more than 13%. Mexico is one country in North America that has been benefiting from more Chinese investments. We take a look on how that's going.
In the last 5 years, China has switched, diversified to new countries such as Chile, Peru, and Mexico. The accumulated investments by China amounted around $171 billion US, and they have generated almost 700,000 jobs in the region. The Belt and Road Initiative, infrastructure projects in China have become critical to understand the eradication of poverty and the increase in terms of the quality of life in China. This is what China is proposing to the rest of the world.
And for more on China's Belt and Road Initiative, here's Robert Hux. He's a member of the Schiller Institute based in Canada.
By putting forward the idea of a consultation, cooperation, and sharing, developing a world system based on trust rather than bullying, China is now creating a system of global governance where countries that had no hope under the domination of colonial powers now have an actual hope of escaping poverty and underdevelopment. So you look at the fact there's now 150 nations that have already signed agreements with China to develop the Belt and Road Initiative, or the One Belt, One Road. So this is a conception totally coherent with China's idea of a shared future for humanity.
We'd like to thank, of course, all of our guests for their time, and a big thanks to you. I'm Philip Yen here in Washington, and you are watching CGTN.